Special Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting for December 7, 2021 to order. And I will look to Councillor MacLeod for the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we could now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship that it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to the adoption of the agenda, and the resolution reads that the content of the Special Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for December 7, 2021 be adopted as presented. Can I get a move in a second, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor MacLeod, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations today, Council? Councillor Madigan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I don't know if this is the appropriate time. I just want to make the viewing public and my colleagues aware that as Tuesdays I work, and so I'm like most Tuesdays I'm here today, but I will be doing my best to have conversation on every part of today's agenda.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor. There are no declarations of pecuniary interest. If you find yourself in that situation as we progress through the agenda, please speak up and let us know the general nature thereof. And that brings us then to item 4, staff reports, and item 4.1 is CCS 2021-7 Grain Terminals Project Status and Built Heritage Assessment Report. And I will pass that over to, I guess maybe we'll start off with Executive Director Peg, and she can introduce our guests.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon, members of council. As we continue to move forward with the Grain Terminal project, I'm pleased to be here today with Archaeological Research Associates, who have prepared a very thorough and professional built heritage assessment of the grain terminal facility and the surrounding lands. This assessment will provide valuable information as we continue to move forward on this high priority project. In light of Council's desire and direction to ensure the town's cultural history and identity is respected, staff retained the heritage firm, as mentioned, Archaeological Research Associates, through a competitive bid process to prepare the built heritage assessment as a preface to a market engagement to help determine the impact that any proposed development may have on the cultural heritage value of the property and ensure that any potential impacts are appropriately honored. In line with the recommendations in the white paper, concurrently with the built heritage assessment, staff issued a request for proposals for an advisor, redevelopment and alternate financing, and the RFP was reviewed by the town's fairness monitor. The RFP closed on October 7th, and I'm pleased to share that we've identified a successful vendor who were in the final stages of negotiating an award. Following the award for an advisor, staff recommend that the built heritage assessment as presented today be provided to the advisor for consideration in the next stages of this project. So with that, Archaeological Research Associates is certainly respected in the industry. ARA has over 50 years of experience in archaeological and heritage consulting, and their work has contributed greatly to the enrichment of Ontario's heritage through discovery, documentation, research, and presentation. And with that, I will introduce Kayla Jonas-Galvin, who's the Heritage Operations Manager. And I believe she's also accompanied with Amy Barnes, Heritage Project Manager. So I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Council, for having us today. I believe that we sent a presentation. There it is. Great. So as Amanda mentioned, my name is Kayla Jonas Galvin. I'm the Heritage Operations Manager at ARA, and I'm here today to present the findings of the Built Heritage Assessment for the Collingwood terminals as well as the surrounding area. For heritage, a heritage assessment is based on real property and real property lines. So we weren't just looking at the terminals, we were looking at the entire pier. So if you wanted to go to the next slide. Thank you. As you may know, under the Ontario Heritage Act or the OHA, there are two types of municipal designation. One is individual property designation, and the second is a heritage conservation district designation. The Collingwood terminals currently has a heritage conservation district designation. It's within the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District. I know there were questions early on in the process if a property could be designated under both. And yes, a property can be designated under both Part 4 and Part 5 designations. Both mechanisms allow for the examination and protection and are about expressing the cultural heritage value or interest of a place, as well as the heritage attributes. However, those may be more in depth with an individual property designation versus a larger heritage conservation district designation. If you go to the next slide, what does heritage designation mean? It means it's all about influencing how changes are made. So it's not made to stop or prohibit change, it's made to guide change to ensure that a property is enhanced without compromising its cultural heritage value or interest. Go to the next slide. So what did we do in this Built Heritage Assessment to support the looking at these Collingwood grain terminals and surrounding areas? We did several field surveys. We were out in the field looking at the property at least 3 times. We also got to go inside. We did extensive research and looking at historic mapping. So we did our own research, and as well, the Collingwood Museum provided us a wealth of information. We looked at land registry, historic photos, directories, newspapers, as well as the numerous previous studies that had been done on the property. Once we had compiled all of our information, we evaluated the property using Ontario Regulation 906, which in Ontario lays out the framework for determining cultural heritage value or interest. We put that all together in a draft report and came up with a statement of cultural heritage value or interest, which basically says why we think that this pier and the grain terminals are of cultural heritage value or interest and why exactly that is, and put forward some recommendations. We did get comments back from staff and department heads, which were incorporated into the final report and provided to you as an attachment for today's presentation. If you wanted to go to the next slide. We also, as part of this assignment, had an extensive public engagement program that was undertaken. And to tell us a little bit more about that, I'm going to just pass it over to my colleague, Amy, who is also our public engagement manager and ran the public engagement for this project.
Thanks, Kayla. Good afternoon, everyone. So I had the pleasure of working on the public engagement portion of this Built Heritage Assessment. And I will say in all of my time, this was the highest response rate we had gotten. So I did feel it was a very robust and comprehensive engagement with the public. We had used all different mediums. We worked with Amanda at the onset of this and your team to set up an engagement strategy that carried us through the whole project and was really well laid out to allow for multiple opportunities for people to engage. And also we added the component of an in-person engagement. So you'll see we had essentially 4 consultation opportunities. 3 were virtual and 1 was the in-person booth. And the first one included both a presentation and followed up with a survey to get some feedback from people. I think we had 29 responses to that first survey, which was an integral part of understanding where the community placed its value on the site specific. So we were able to get a lot of information to follow up on and integrate into the report from that first survey. The second and third surveys allowed us to refine those features and provide some more clarity from the public about how this process works. And as I'm sure some of you are aware, the in-person booth and the second portion of the consultation, there was a lot of emphasis put on explaining what we were doing and why we were doing this, and how that looked in order to gain valuable feedback, which we did in the final one. So as part of the report, you'll see we have included the majority of the responses and a nice summary about all the stats we got from that for you to read within that. Next slide, please. And then we also capitalized on your Engage Collingwood website, which is the repository for this. And we certainly allowed a lot of traffic to come into that. And anyone we spoke with or communicated with know that this is the repository moving forward of where they can find more information as additional studies and additional plans unfold. So this was also used as a way for people to provide feedback, to ask our questions, and to get directly in touch with the town as needed throughout the entire process. I think that's it for my portion. You go to the next slide and I'll pass it back to Kayla to carry on. Oh, no, sorry. Here's our numbers. I didn't realize. There you go. So I was pretty close, 427. And then we had 73 people do the second one. We also realized that based on conversations with the in-person booth, that some people were having trouble accessing it online. And so we were able to provide them an opportunity for a handwritten copy. And Amanda was great at facilitating that and allowing them to provide their feedback that way as well. We had over 45 people stop in at the booth and ask questions with some great visuals and help walk them through the process. And then in survey 2, we had over 500 people view it and almost 200 people fill in the detailed survey. Next slide. So I will pass this back to Kayla. All in all, I will just say it was a very comprehensive and robust engagement, and I really enjoyed allowing the public's comments and thoughts be integrated into our report.
Thank you, Amy. So the results of all that hard work were to come up with a statement of cultural heritage value, or CHVI. And we found when looking at the Collingwood terminals and surrounding area that it did have design or physical value, historical or associative value, as well as contextual value. So hitting all 3 of the major categories in Ontario Regulation 906. So I won't read this word for word, but we will go through the highlights. So the Collingwood Pier was found to be a critical part of the Collingwood Harbour, which reflects an evolution of over 100 years of continuous modification shaped by human activity. So it is an organically evolved harbour landscape, and this portion of it is a piece of that overall landscape. The Collingwood terminals themselves represent an increasingly rare type of industrial building on the Great Lakes, and it is a representative example of urban grain terminal construction. So that basically means that this building is unique or rare, and increasingly rare along the Great Lakes. Several have been demolished, and there are several more that are in danger of being lost. The Collingwood grain terminals themselves also display a high degree of technical achievement. Within this landscape, there's also contains the only remaining building from Collingwood's extensive boat building industry. So we acknowledge that although the Watts Boathouse is not in the original location, its important tie to the harbor's historical activities have been moved onto this portion of the landscape and are interpreted there not only through the boathouse itself, but also the interpretive plaques and the other industrial artifacts that have been placed there. So although it's not at the original location, that value has been expressed on this landscape. Next slide, please. So the historical or associative value, obviously the landscape as well as the grain terminals themselves are associated with the growth and the development of the town of Collingwood. It's one of the reasons that this piece of land is included within the Downtown Heritage Conservation District. We also noted that it is associated with a well-known Canadian architect, engineer, and politician. This is the person who designed and was responsible for the design of the actual terminal buildings. Go to the next slide. We found for contextual value that it is obviously has the physical remains the physical remains of the historical industries from the waterfront, along the waterfront. And it's thus historically linked to its surroundings. It's also functionally and historically linked to its surroundings through representation of the town's growth and development. It's the site where many industries operated within the larger Collingwood Harbor, such as boat building, which has now been commemorated here. And it continues to be an integral part of the town as a recreational space, both with the boating as well as the 2 parks that are there. And it's undisputable that those Collingwood grain terminals are a physical landmark within the town and along the waterfront. You can go to the next slide. So the values are great. They tell us what is important. They were developed with our research, our on the site investigations, as well as the consultation. But the next part of that is what are those physical parts of that landscape that need to be retained or should be retained in order to represent those cultural heritage values. So how do we tie those values to actual physical remains on the ground? So that was a portion of our consultation, as well as working through the history and evolution of this landscape. So when it came time to figuring that out, we have produced a list of the heritage attributes, and there's also physical maps within the Built Heritage Assessment, which shows you exactly where those things are, both on the terminals and also on the landscape. So I won't read them all out, but there is a number of heritage attributes that were attributed to the grain terminals. So not just the grain terminals as one building, but individual parts of that building that represent the different values that are associated with it. If you want to go to the next slide. So we also had a number of attributes on the landscape, which were the other individual buildings on the landscape, but also the layout of the entire landscape, and then views to and from those buildings within the landscape. There were also, I'll note, a number of views that people contributed during the consultation. But as we were looking at the property through the Ontario Heritage Act, the heritage attributes for those are limited to what's on the property. So views outside of the property lines can't be listed. So these views are just those ones within the property. But I did want to acknowledge many people expressed views from very far away, also out in the water, looking back to the terminals, which didn't make the list. And that is why, not that they're not important, but just that within our legislative framework, they cannot be listed. If you wanted to go to the next slide. So what does all that mean? We have refined a list of cultural heritage values. We've refined a list of heritage attributes. The Collingwood grain terminals are protected under Part 4 of the Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Heritage Conservation District. So that means that once a preferred end state for the terminals is determined, the HCD plan requires that a heritage impact assessment be undertaken. We are recommending that this HIA also consider the findings of this Built Heritage Assessment in terms of looking at the heritage attributes and the heritage values, not only in the HCD plan, but the ones that are listed within this study. The HCD plan also says that once a preferred state for a building is determined, that a conservation plan should be drawn up, which can also use information contained in this Built Heritage Assessment. I think that that is the last slide. If you wanted to go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Amy, for that presentation. Before we get to council, I'm going to look to Clerk Thomas to see, Sarah, if we have anyone in our audience who would like to speak to the presentation.
Not at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Well, then I'll read in the resolution and we'll get this on the floor for council. And the resolution reads that staff report CCS 2021-7 grain terminals project status and built heritage assessment report be received, and that the built heritage assessment report as presented by Archaeological Research Associates Limited be received. And further, the council directs staff to provide the built heritage assessment completed by Archaeological Research Associates Limited to the grain terminal advisor, redevelopment and alternative financing to be awarded, to provide advice and guidance on how best to incorporate these findings into the next stages of the grain terminals project as identified in the white paper. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? All right, how much of that did anyone hear? How long have I been muted? 0. Great. All right, my apologies. All right, I will read in the recommendation again then. And the recommendation is that staff report CCS 2021-7 grain terminals project status and built heritage assessment report be received, and that the built heritage assessment report is presented by Archaeological Research Associates Limited be received. And further, the council directs staff to provide the built heritage assessment completed by Archaeological Research Associates Limited to the grain terminal advisor, redevelopment and alternative financing, which is to be awarded, and to provide advice and guidance on how best incorporate these findings into the next stages of the grain terminals project as identified in the white paper. And I think I had Councillor Jeffrey and Doherty move and second that. So I will now open the floor to questions or comments from council. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And through you, I guess, to Executive Director Peg. So without at all trivializing the value of this report, because it was extremely well done and extremely thorough. But I'm asking myself what we have really gained from it. The statement of heritage value would have come, if not in whole, then at least in part from the original Heritage District inventory and assessment. Much of the information was based on a literature review. Much of the engineering results were based on the Tacoma study, which has already been done. And much of the work that will still need to be done still needs to be done, right? They're still going to have to do a heritage impact assessment. They're still going to have to do a more detailed appraisal of the physical status of the building. So again, I'm very supportive of the terminals, but I'm really perplexed as to in what context to put this study.
I'll pass that through to Executive Director Peg to start with. Go ahead, Amanda.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Doherty. And I would encourage Kayla and Amy and CEO Skinner to add in as well as I do my best to answer this. The intention of the study was to look at specific details related to the grain terminals that may not have been captured in the general designation as part of the heritage district. The assessment looked at specific physical features that, when we're looking at potential redevelopment partners, could be used in evaluation criteria to help us assess the submissions that we hope are forthcoming. This more detailed information would be provided to the advisor to help in the creation of as I mentioned, scoring criteria, whereas prior to this assessment, we didn't have the level of detail specific to the grain terminals that we now have.
Is there anyone who wants to add to that answer? I'll open the floor to Amanda and Amy, or sorry, Kayla and Amy, or CAO Skinner. All right, I think Amanda's hit all the high points. Is there any follow-up, Councillor?
No, that's helpful. It's just, you hate to see duplication, and I just see that there has been a lot of duplication, and there will be duplication as we move forward. I find that a little bit distressing. It is, I guess it is what it is, but that's how I feel about it anyway. Thank you. And again, not taking away from anything that's been presented or the quality of this document at all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I don't know if staff wants to speak to the idea of duplication. As I read the report, it points out the relevance and the context of how the grain terminals are an important part of our heritage, and that they tick the 3 boxes of the contextual heritage evaluation criteria. And maybe then I'll just pick up on Councillor Doherty's thread. If Executive Director Peg or our consultants can just speak to how that informs the next steps in the process. I know in the recommendations you talk about once we've determined a proponent, that this document will be important in further studies and informing any proposals put forward by the proponent in terms of their recognition of the cultural heritage significance. Perhaps Director Peg, you can speak to that, and maybe the consultants can give some context to that.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through you to members of the council. So the intent of this study in terms of how it will fit into the next phases, prior to this study, in addition to the Heritage District, I'm lost for the words, the Heritage District designation, we knew anecdotally that the grain terminals and surrounding area were of value to a number of members within the community. This study allowed us to solidify that and put those values from the community into terms that can be shared with the advisor and future proponents. The study itself will help us, as I mentioned, to create evaluation criteria. So when we're looking at future proposals, those that honor or retain these built heritage attributes would possibly, presumably based on input from the advisor, receive a higher weighted score when looking at those future options. It also helped us identify, and I'll use the word honor again, what attributes in the event that the grain terminals did not remain would need to be appropriately honored. So that work specific to the grain terminals had not yet been completed. I know ARA had mentioned with the heritage designation from being within the Heritage District, there's already processes in place that would need to be followed with future partners, but this just adds greater granularity to allow us to assess future proposals.
Thank you, Executive Director. Council, are there any other questions or comments before I call a vote? Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So in the scope of the timelines that we're hoping to achieve the decision this council needs to make, are we on track within these next steps?
Executive Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey. Absolutely. So as mentioned, we have are in the award phase on the advisor project. And within that RFP document, we were explicit on the timelines that we're working towards, and that was factored into the evaluation of the proponents we received. Received a number of great submissions and are quite pleased with the vendor we're currently negotiating with, and they have indicated their complete understanding of the priority of this project and are prepared to work with us to deliver it within the time frame.
Thank you.
Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciated Councillor Doherty's question because I think we always should be asking, why are we doing this anyway? But I was also glad to hear Executive Director Pegg's answer, because although I've heard a presentation, I believe it was a master's student a couple of years ago about why that person thought these were heritage buildings. I have always wondered what is significant about, the terminals. So I was glad to hear that whether we go forward or the decisions made to demolish the terminals, at least we know what we should be honoring. So, because the town really hadn't done that before. And so anyway, I was just glad to hear that answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call. Any other questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And thank you very much to Kayla and Amy for your presentation. Certainly a lot of very interesting history in there. And so it will help to set the stage as we move forward on this important project. So thank you for your time and work. And thank you also to Executive Director Peg for her work, stick handling all this. That brings us then to item 4.2, which is C 2021-25, considerations, recurrent council member leave of absence and potential mayoral vacancy. And I'm going to pass this over to Clerk Almost.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a brief presentation together with a couple additional questions that have been asked that I will provide some clarification today within the presentation. And I guess we will begin. So staff put together this report in relatively short order based on the leave of absence respecting the deputy mayor, understanding that we do have ongoing municipal business and how is the best way to proceed with ensuring that responsibilities and duties that the deputy mayor was responsible for have been addressed. We also decided to throw in some information regarding processes and next steps regarding potential council leaves of absence in general, together with the potential changes that may result as we get the results of the provincial election after the date in June. So our first slide. So I think I've already touched on the background here. The Municipal Act does state that the office of a member of council of a municipality becomes vacant if they are absent from meetings of council for 3 successive months without being authorized to do so by resolution. The following are not eligible to be elected as a member of council or to hold office as a member of council. That being a member of a legislative assembly as provided by the Legislative Assembly Act or of the Senate or House of Commons of Canada. So again, that pertains to the provincial election in June. Next slide. A council leave of absence. So a leave of absence is not considered a vacant seat. The member of council was duly elected to that position, and a leave of absence does not entitle council to provide the appointment to fill a vacant seat. And again, a resolution of council would be required to extend a leave that's longer than 3 months. And if a member is absent from council meetings for longer than the 3 months, this is where the resolution would be required. So that resolution would have to occur should the deputy mayor not return to the council tables by mid-February. A resolution of council would be needed to consider to extend that leave, otherwise declare the seat as vacant. Our next slide. So delegated authority during a leave of absence. So currently the deputy mayor serves as county councillor. So the county permits each municipality to identify an alternate member in the absence of the mayor or the deputy mayor. We have an established bylaw in the town of Collingwood that provides that the council with the highest votes in a municipal election is the alternate county council member. So staff are recommending at this point, following discussions with the county clerk, that if the alternate is deemed to be delegated the authority of the deputy mayor for the purposes of county council, then an alternate would be, an additional alternate could be established. So following the intent of bylaw 2018-095, we're recommending then that the next highest member of council in the 2018 municipal election be designated as alternate. I have reached out to Councillor Comey. Councillor Comey is the next highest elected councillor, and she has confirmed her interest in being the alternate, should that be the recommendation that council wishes to proceed with. The BIA director, the deputy mayor, is currently the interim director to the BIA Board of Management. At this time, if there is not further interest from members of council to fill this seat, as there is there will be 2 meetings that would be without the deputy mayor. So the January, pending his return, could be February. So there's 1, potentially 2 meetings that would require a temporary replacement to that position, albeit the deputy mayor was identified as an interim replacement during the transition of the new BIA board that was put together last summer, that's been working very diligently and successfully in their endeavors over the last 1.5 years. Additionally, as a signing officer, the deputy mayor is designated as a signing officer on behalf of the municipality, and staff recommend that council appoint the highest elected member of council be delegated to sign in the absence of the deputy mayor. And with respect to the Affordable Housing Task Force and Emergency Control Group, that no interim appointment is required at this time. Next slide. Councillor Comey, as I indicated, has confirmed her interest to act as the county council alternate. And these are the additional questions and information that I have received since the publishing of this agenda. So a member is entitled to compensation and benefits during a medical leave of absence. A member on medical leave cannot return until authorized by his or her physician to do so. Since the deputy mayor's seat is not vacant, another member of council or eligible public candidate cannot be appointed to the position of deputy mayor, as earlier confirmed. Another question posed was, can the mayor's or deputy mayor's seat remain vacant since we are so close to an election? No, the Municipal Act requires that a seat must be filled within 60 days of the vacancy, unless it is within 90 days voting day in an election year. So we have received some conflicting advice that we would like to confirm regarding the vacancy pieces itself. As I'll get into it in our follow-up slides here. The temporary vacancy also on the DNOC committee was not identified in the staff report, but there remains a vacancy in that for the months of January and February, or if there's a special meeting of the DNO standing committee that's called. Therefore, council can choose again to leave that seat vacant. Otherwise, seek interest from other members of council that currently don't sit on that committee to let us know prior to the December 20th council meeting. We have received confirmation from Councillor Bob Madigan that Councillor Madigan would be interested in fulfilling that role. So we know we do have 1 interested member that would sit on the Development and Operations Standing Committee for the months of January and potentially February. Next slide. With respect to the council potential vacancy, so the information contained here pertains to, in particular, the mayor's seat. So in working with our municipal advisor from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the seat becomes vacant at the time the results of the election are posted in the Ontario Gazette, or when a resignation letter is received by the clerk from the member of council. If the vacancy occurs 90 days before voting day of a regular election, which in 2022 is October 24th, the municipality is not required to fill the vacancy. The Municipal Act requires a vacancy, though, to be filled within 60 days of the seat being declared vacant. If the vacancy falls outside of the 90-day period to a regular election. So again, that date is July 26, 2022. So at this point, based on some conflicting advice that we received, we would like to get clarification again from legal about what that period, that overlap, the overlap could look like. So basically, if an election is called on June the 2nd, we do end up with a vacancy in the mayor's position, council is required by motion to declare the seat as vacant. So that could occur, I believe the earliest date is mid-June, where that resolution could be held, unless there is a special meeting held earlier to declare by resolution that seat vacant. And from there, the 60 days would commence. So there is a period from that 60 days that will surpass the July 26, 2022 timeframe, which is the date of the 90 days prior to voting day. So in this mid period, we're seeking clarification on truly does a vacancy need to be replaced after that July 26 date. Next slide. So looking at filling a vacancy, the following options have been used by other municipalities to fill vacancies on council: inviting applications from interested qualified electors to be considered for the vacancy. Applicants could be provided an opportunity to address council and respond to questions before a vote is taken. Appoint an eligible candidate from the most recent municipal election who ran for the same or another office. Appoint an eligible candidate that was previously elected to the same office or another office on municipal council, or appoint another qualified individual who consents to the appointment. The Municipal Elections Act does not allow for a by-election to take place should the vacancy occur after March 31st in an election in the year of a regular election. So again, depending on, for example, the deputy mayor, should a vacancy occur prior to March 31st, there is a potential for council to consider a by-election, but after March 31st, a by-election could not occur. Next slide. So these were additional questions again received regarding this aspect of the staff report. What if the mayor leaves office prior to the provincial election? It is not a requirement of the Municipal Act or the Municipal Elections Act that an individual campaigning for a position needs to provide a leave of absence or resign from their position during the campaign period. However, if the office becomes vacant prior to or after the provincial election, the staff report as provided does identify some options. And again, that's dependent on legal advice that we get regarding that area of time that has an overlap. And again, if the mayor requests a leave of absence prior to the provincial election, the same principles outlined within the report, this report would apply, and staff would provide a staff report on interim arrangements that may be necessary. Next slide. Should a seat become vacant and there's an interested member of council wishing to fill that seat? So this item was not specifically identified within the staff report. However, it would be considered part of a call for eligible candidates. So this will require that a current member of council expressing their interest to fill this the seat to council or submit their interest through a call of interest once the seat becomes vacant. So there is an option that would go with this provision, again, subject to legal advice that we will be providing when the report comes back to full council. And this option would include an option to the recommendation could be to review all interest of the current council members to fill the vacancy prior to a call to the general public being made, should council wish to provide this opportunity to those that sit on council currently. So should a current member of council be appointed to fill the vacancy, their seat would then become vacant at the time of the appointment. The process to fill the successful candidate council member seat would then need to take place using the processes agreed upon by council. Next slide. So again, this was the recommendation that was included in the report, that in the event that council seat becomes vacant, council authorized staff to immediately proceed for a call for interest for potential candidates to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the council term, which is until November the 14th of 2022, for council's consideration and appointment. A call for interest could occur in advance of the provincial election or immediately following a vacancy. And council would need to be cognizant of candidates who may wish to run or nominated or are nominated candidates of the 2022 municipal election, and such an appointment being it to whether they're to their advantage or disadvantage of being a candidate in the October election. Again, nominations do open for the 2022 municipal election in May of next year. Again, this is subject to receiving of legal advice, and as well as council's decision on whether they wish to seek interest from members of council first prior to going to the public for any calls from eligible candidates that would be interested in filling such a vacancy. Next slide. And that's it for our presentation today.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'll ask if there is anyone from the audience who would like to speak to this report.
Not at this time,
Okay.
Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So I will read in the recommendation to get it on the floor. The staff report C 2021-25 entitled Considerations re Current Council Member Leave of Absence and Potential Mayoral Vacancy. And further, that council approve the recommendations contained herein as follows. Leave of absence, number 1. County Council, the current alternate be designated the authority of the deputy mayor, and the next member of council with the highest votes in the 2018 municipal election be designated as the alternate, and that is Councillor Comey. 2, BIA director, that the clerk continue to participate in board functions as appropriate during the interim and act as the liaison, round bracket, not a voting member of the board, end bracket, pending input from the BIA Board of Management. 3, Affordable Housing Task Force and interim replacement is not required. And 4, official town signatory, staff be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to appoint the highest elected member of council as an official signatory of the municipality to act in the absence of the mayor and or deputy mayor. Seat vacancy. In the event that a council seat becomes vacant, council authorized staff to immediately proceed with a call for interest for potential eligible candidates to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the council term, round bracket, until November 14th, 2022, end bracket, for council's consideration. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Doherty, and I'll open the floor to questions. Any questions or comments, council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I guess my first request is if we could sever all of these, please. I don't think any of them are interdependent.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll wait. So if we proceed with number 1, I'm just going to wait and see if there's any other questions. I'm really not sure we need to deal with the alternate at county at this point. I think any other questions I have may have to be asked in camera because they would be specific to individuals, but I'll wait to see what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, other questions or comments? Councillor McLeod.
Just for clarity's sake, for perhaps any civilians who might be watching, when we say in the event a council seat becomes vacant in the final paragraph, we are meaning one of 3 types of council seats: a mayor's seat, a deputy mayor's seat, or a councillor's seat. Yes? through you, Mayor Saunderson, to the clerk.
Yeah, Sarah?
Correct.
Right. And also for clarity's sake, the current alternate to county council is me, because I was the highest ranking vote getter in the 2018 election. My name's not on there, but I think that that needs to be clarified as well. Thank you.
Yes, no, that is the case, and I'll just look to Clerk Thomas. I think a bylaw confirming that was passed at the outset of this term.
Correct.
Thank you. I too have some things to say on a couple of these, but they would have to happen in camera.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. So again, speaking to item 1, nomination of an alternate to county council, I have no concern with an alternate to the alternate being nominated. I think in spite of the very, very best efforts of both the mayor and the deputy mayor as our county council reps, I sometimes feel a bit of a disconnect between our level of council and the upper tier. And I think the more of us who are involved, engaged, participating at county council, either directly or indirectly, is a good thing for all of council.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin, go ahead.
I'm content with the staff resolution as written, although I was interested in Councillor Jeffrey's comment that do we need anybody right now? And I guess at this point, our deputy mayor could be back within a few months. That's currently the expectation. So I was wondering, through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff, how many county council meetings there could be that we need a possible alternate for.
I can answer that. There are no county council meetings for the month of December. There are committee meetings. I don't believe there's any committee meeting that the deputy mayor sits on. And then typically there are 2 meetings per month, a committee of the whole and a council meeting twice monthly. So depending on the deputy mayor's timing, if he comes back in later February, there would be 4 council meetings and 4 committee of the whole meetings in 2022.
Okay, thank you for that.
I'm going to look to Clerk Thomas. There's been an expression on the part of 2 council members to go in camera, and I'm just wondering when would be the best time to do that, and if we're able to do that in the context of a special SIC meeting.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. At this time, in-camera is required to be posted on the agenda. So we don't have an in-camera listed today. We do have a number of other items of business today. So if council wishes to defer this report following an in-camera session, we do have an in-camera scheduled for the 13th and can have that conversation. And at that point, we should have the legal advice as well that we are waiting for, because that could change, in particular, staff's recommendation regarding a seat vacancy as well. So that would be my advice to the committee at this time.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And in light of that answer, is there either Councillor Jeffrey or Councillor McLeod that would like to speak to a motion to defer? I've got Councillor McLeod and then Councillor Jeffrey. Go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
So moved.
All right, Councillor Jeffrey, will you second that? All right, so that is a motion to defer the matter to the December 13 council meeting. It is of deferral, so there's no conversation. So I will call the vote then. All in favor? And opposed? So noted, and that is carried. And that brings us then to item 4.3, which is T 2021-24, 2022 development charges. And I will pass this over to Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have a presentation for this one, and I just thought I'd share through you to members of committee that there's a couple of points that need to be highlighted. The first one just being that the current development charge bylaw includes a provision to index these fees on an annual basis. It does state in the bylaw that we will use the latest in the quarterly statistics for the NRB CPI, which is non-residential building construction price index. And of course, that is the third quarter. And so we have used that, and that's the 11.6. I'll note that the second quarter was at or around 7.7%. And I can share that staff did sort of bat around the possibility of either combining or averaging the 2 quarters. We spoke to the other treasurers in the area. Many have similar bylaws stating that they use the latest in quarterly statistics, which of course, again, is the third quarter. So they have proceeded with that NRB CPI rate of 11.6% as well. I think maybe what is key to understanding this change is that, in fact, we have seen these types of increases in construction tenders, especially throughout the 2022 budget process. And I don't expect we'll see many changes to those in the early parts of 2022. The intention of the development charges are to cover the costs of these projects. So based on that information, I just think it makes sense to move forward with what we have presented. But that's all I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. Clerk Almus, is there anyone from our audience that would like to speak to this item? Okay, thank you. So I'll put the resolution on the floor then, and the resolution reads that Council receives staff report T 2021-24 for information. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Hammond, thank you. Council, any questions or comments? Councillor Hammond.
Just one, Mr. Mayor, through you to Treasurer Quinlan. I did look at the staff report, and these are fairly sizable increases to our development charges. I am in agreement with increasing these charges, and I know they're in accordance with our bylaw, but they will be an increase to the cost of housing for every permit that's pulled that pays these charges. And so my question is, if this turns out to be a temporary bump in inflationary pressures on construction prices, and prices drop again, will a decrease, be reflected in further, in later years' charges? How would this unfold? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Hamlin. I think we're all hoping and expecting that throughout 2022 we will start to see a decline in pricing for construction purposes. And if that did happen, of course, when we compared year over year, the expectation would be that we would see a decrease. And that was a bit of the discussion we had at the Treasurers Group for Simcoe County, that possibly this time next year we would see, a reverse of that. But I can't say for certain, of course. It will be what the market bears at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Doherty.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway through you to the treasurer. And just kind of picking up on Councillor Hamlin's thread, affordability housing. I would assume that council would still have the discretion to waive some or all of DCs for a meritorious project, creating more affordable or attainable housing.
Treasurer Quinlan.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty. I think one point of clarification I will make is that it's not a waiving of the charges. In fact, development charges have to be collected. That being said, members of council could agree or could determine that they issue a grant in the amount of the development charges to reduce that portion for an affordable housing or attainable housing project if they so chose.
Follow up, Councillor.
Okay, is that new? I do recall having waived DCs in the past. And I'm thinking, you know, most recently the Simcoe County public housing at the corner of High and First Street.
Treasurer Quinn.
If I may, Councillor Doherty. I don't think it's new. I'd have to look at the report to see what the exact wording was, but I suspect that the amount was still included, and meaning that the fees or the amounts went into the development charge reserve funds and offset by a grant through the tax levy. But I'd have to double check to see how that report was worded.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. And then this brings us to item 5, which is budget discussions. And during our budget discussion, notices of motion are not required for motions to change the draft that is on the floor. And I will pass it over to CAO Skinner and Treasurer Quinlan for introduction and presentation today.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you to members of committee, we do have a presentation once again, so I'll just wait for that to pull up. Thank you, Stephanie. And we can go to the next slide, please. So once again, I know you've seen this slide many times, but I just want to remind everyone where we started the process and where we're at today. We spent August pulling the team of staff together to review the CBSP, or the Community-Based Strategic Plan, as well as master plans and continuous improvement projects. We moved into September with the first staff report, which was brought forward, and a tax rate increase of 1% was set as a guideline at that meeting. Following that, in October, staff brought forward a report that outlined the budget requests that were greater than 20,000, and the resolution was to move forward with these priorities into the next phase. There was lots of activity in November. The initial drafts of the budget were presented. We're now at the 3rd level of draft. Members of council and the public engagements and sessions were held on November 30th. And it's hard to believe, but we are here in December, and today we're going to review the public comments and the input on the 3rd draft of the 2022 budget. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that since the last time we met, or what was presented at the November 30th public information sessions, there have been no changes financially. And again, that what's following here will be the results of the public input, as well as how it is addressed by this proposed budget. Next slide, please. So just to bring us all back where we are, we're currently at a 2.01% tax rate increase in this proposed budget. Note that from 2019 to 2021, overall, the town's tax rate decreased by just over 4%, which translated into savings of just over $39 in total for a taxpayer with a median assessed home. This year, with a 2.01% tax rate increase on a median assessed home, the results would be an increase in taxes paid by about $46.27. Next slide, please. So we've seen this slide again several times. It's what I often refer to when I'm trying to explain or show the changes from budget to budget, meaning from the 2021 levy to the 2022 levy. And you can see on the very left of the graph, the total 2021 levy was 35.1 million. And that brings us all the way over to the right of the graph, showing almost 0.8 million for the 2022 levy. And the various unavoidable and service enhancements that bring us to today's proposed 2.01% tax rate increase. Next slide, please. Just to sum up, in total on this draft, each percentage point, again, of taxation is equal to approximately $370,000. The total change in the levy year over year is 1.6 million. And again, I would finally note that a proportion of this change is absorbed through our assessment growth that has been set at 2.47% for 2021. Next slide, please. So throughout our presentations and also throughout the budget book, we've been trying to outline and communicate appropriately to taxpayers and members of council what is included in the 2022 budget and sort of what value is included in the budget to present throughout 2022. So the next few slides are going to cover what's included and what the value is for that money. Of course, staff will continue to provide and deliver the many programs and services that taxpayers have come to expect and rely on. It also contains continued focus and a drive towards achieving the community-based strategic plan. I'm going to break it down based on the pillars, and what I'm including here are just the new items. Of course, there are many other items that are explained and we've walked through in the budget books that are available publicly. But under the transparent and accountable local government, what we've included as new is an enterprise risk management approach, a business continuity plan. We've also requested an extension of the financial analyst contract position, which again is fully funded. And we've included a communications position as well. Under the public connections to revitalize world-class waterfront pillar, we have the design for the Heritage Drive update, an extension of servicing, which was included as part of an asset sale legacy project, a waterfront public realm design plan for the shipyards area, and local businesses lease of space in Harborview Park for watercraft and bike rentals, so people can experience the waterfront in many new ways. Next slide, please. So we have a lot under the support and manage growth and prosperity. Loads of new items here, an updated official plan, which will be in conjunction with the county's MCR or Municipal Comprehensive Review. We've also included or requested an inclusion for a development engineer, which again is fully funded through engineer development fees. The updates for the zoning bylaw will begin. We do have a water and wastewater capacity allocation framework. We've got enhanced communication with the development community, consulting planners and engineering, enhancing the post-approvals support for developers and the community. We've enhanced the public-facing tool showing building and planning applications and approvals, an introduction of a zoning certificate process, and the delivering of the 2022 Economic Development Action Plan priorities. Next slide, please. Under the enhanced community well-being and sustainability pillar, we have, of course, the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund included at $350,000. We also have an affordable housing planning specialist included at $80,000. And of course, the continued work on the Collingwood World Summit and Sustainable Development Goal 11 pilot projects. Under the Encourage Diverse Culture and Arts Offerings pillar, we've proceeded with the next steps recommended in the 2021 Arts Center feasibility study to narrow and refine the scope of that concept, continue and strengthen the Unity Collective, and build inclusion and diversity into the town's approaches, including human resource policies. Next slide, please. Additionally, we have a few other service enhancements that meet continuous improvement goals and other master plans. They, of course, are highlighted in our draft budget book, but we also have the additional staffing resources requested, the Business Accelerator Program, the Speed Reduction Study, Council Compensation Review, and the Heritage Tax Relief. Next slide, please. Again, we're going to continue with a laser focus on delivery with new trail crossings and signals and updates to the active transportation signage and markings. We, of course, have the much anticipated water treatment plant expansion, along with some innovative interim capacity solutions. We've got the Fisher Field improvements, as well as Sunset Point Park and splash pad completion. Next slide, please. We're also going to be preparing for a strategic refresh with recommendations to manage short-term accommodations and to better enforce those rules. There's a review of the approach that bylaw takes, including enforcement options that will have public input. We have both an IT and an HR master plan update and continued supports for our staff to enable them to deliver exceptional services, including continued engagement and appreciation and training supports. Next slide, please. So over the next few slides, we're going to review the results of the public survey. Then we'll move into the discussions and our comments included on the Town's Engage page. To start, we have the public survey. It was opened in August and stayed open for nearly the end of September. We did receive 425 responses, and I will note that that is not statistically significant given the population. And the survey included 11 questions. Next slide, please. The first 4 questions in the public survey were mostly demographic, so I'm not going to review those. We're going to review what we think is most important or most critical to members of council. So I'm starting out with question 5, and the intention was to understand what respondents felt about the level of service they currently receive for their tax dollars. And I'm happy to say that the column graph here shows that over 85% rated the services that they received as fair to excellent. Next slide, please. I think question 6 was probably one of the most important questions in that it helps staff and council to gauge the importance of the community-based strategic plan. And again, I'm happy to say that the CBSP continues to be extremely relevant and significant. What shows here on the graph is the percentage of people who rated the goals and objectives as very important or somewhat important. And as council may recall, as part of the 2022 budget, staff outlined the many projects and services and continuous improvement plans that help to achieve these goals. Next slide, please. I also think question 7 was very relevant. It asked the question of what issues the public felt were most important to the community and to rank them among 12. The top 5 were housing and accommodations, economy and jobs, environment and climate change, infrastructure and transportation. And number 5 was property taxes. Next slide, please. So this next slide lists out the remaining 7 issues the public felt were important: community spaces, waterfront master plan, governance and transparency, provision of recreational facilities, crime and criminal activity, arts, culture and heritage, and finally, active transportation. Next slide, please. I think what's maybe the most important or most critical piece is that we need to communicate throughout the budget documents how the proposed 2022 budget addresses what the public said and felt were the top issues. I've only included the top 5 here, however, just for brevity's sake, but again, the public budget document includes information that ties these things together quite nicely. So under number 1, the number 1 priority, housing accommodations, again, we have $350,000 that's been included for a reserve fund for affordable housing. We also have $80,000 for the planning specialist. And again, continued investment in social housing, both in the High Street and Birch Street areas. For under economy, as being the second rank, is $150,000 for the business accelerator, continued funding for the BDC or the Business Development Center. The third ranked item was environment and climate. And we have the asset sale proceeds that are available under the Greening Legacy Reserve Fund at $1 million. There's $30,000 included under the development of the Climate Action Plan. $100,000 has been included for the full year of the Climate Action Change Specialist. Additionally, under the official plan update, we've got $60,000 included. There's many improvements and inclusions under the wastewater treatment plant inflow and the water treatment plant expansion. We also have $100,000 included for additional tree planting that was received through donations. And finally, $45,000 allocated under an aerator for the Eddie Bush Memorial Arena. Next slide, please. The rank number 4 was infrastructure and transportation. And again, there's about $15.4 million included in the capital budget for asset renewal and new construction projects as well. And finally, number 5 was property tax rates. And we're including a modest 2.01% tax rate increase for this year. Next slide, please. With question 8, the survey asked what other issues the public felt were important to the community if they weren't listed in the previous questions. We did receive 165 responses on this. I've only noted the most popular because there's just so many to include, but they are included as an appendix to today's report. But the first one was the grain terminals. I'll note that some were in favor of preservation of them, while others commented on removing them, but keeping the property for public space. As council is aware, there's a separate public engagement project that's been completed with respect to this. The second one was more green space and expansion of parks and recreational facilities and services. I'll note that in the 2022 budget, we see the much anticipated Sunset Point Park completion, along with the splash pad as 2 very major projects for this year. The third ranked item was development. Again, some were in favor of reducing these numbers, but there were also many comments related to including waterfront and watershed preservation, as well as affordable housing mandates within planning applications. And note again that the update to the official plan and zoning bylaws are included in the 2022 municipal budget. Number 4 was accessibility, which most of comments were around improving accessibility of town's facilities, including parks and recreational areas. And finally, speed reduction, where many areas of town were identified. And I'll note again that a speed study is included in this budget. Next slide, please. We also offered members of the public the ability to make comments and suggestions or ask questions on the town's Engage site. There were 2 main areas of concern that were commented on, and they were once again affordable housing and climate action. And finally, I would say the last piece of public engagement was our public sessions that were held on November 30th, which were unfortunately not very well attended by the public. However, for those that did attend, the most pressing issue was, of course, climate change and how the 2022 budget addresses these ongoing concerns. Members of council did request a list of projects and services that were included for next year, and they were noted as part of question 7 that we shared earlier on. So I think we've addressed that. And I think overall, many significant and important ideas and comments, suggestions were received throughout the public engagement process. And I do believe that staff feel that the current draft of the 2022 municipal budget addresses both council's vision and the interests of the public. Next slide, please. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. I'm going to look first to Clerk Almost to see if we have anyone in our audience who would like to speak to this. Thank you, Sarah. So I'll read in the resolution, and it reads that Council receives staff report T 2021-23 for information, and the council provides staff direction to move forward to the public meeting on December 13th, 2021. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Doherty. And I'll open the floor up then to council for questions or comments. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So further to my comments at the presentation of the previous draft, I would like to move that we remove the $80,000 and the addition of the communications person. Per my comments at that time, I don't think we've strategically addressed what we need to in terms of that portfolio, particularly in enhancing communications of council decisions and supporting the mayor in going forward. I think we need to put some more thought to that. And also we've added 30 full-time equivalent jobs since 2018, and that's after we took in IT and water in-house. And I think we need to show a little bit of restraint in those terms. So I don't know if I have a second or not, but I would move that.
Okay, I'm going to hold off on the seconder for that. I'm going to go around the table and then we'll come back to Councillor Jeffrey and we'll look for others, just get comments and get a sense of whether there are many amendments for us to deal with today. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can just add, I guess, another omission I would like to see this year would be the removal of $50,000 that has been allocated for the UN Sustainable Communities Conference for 2022. And that is not because I don't see it as having value, but I do see that we should be, in my view, receiving support from the UN or from other participating communities or even from our surrounding region to assist us in underwriting that significant cost.
Okay. I will come back to you. I've written that down, but don't let me forget, please, Councillor Doherty. We will deal with that amendment. Do you have any other comments or questions on the budget as proposed now?
Actually, these aren't cuts, but I do thank the treasurer for flagging those items that would be included in the budget that have to do with climate change and climate change mitigation. I could actually add, although I'm not sure we can put a precise dollar value on it, but the on-demand transit initiative will almost for certain result in reduced greenhouse gas emissions from public transportation, both directly and indirectly. Secondly, I know that the private tree bylaw is included, or I have been assured that it is included in 2022 by Director Culver, and that will have a important benefit in terms of adding to our carbon sink potential in this community.
Thank you. Councillor, any other comments or questions or amendments to put on the floor? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First off, one of which is, I'm certain that I've heard this prior and I apologize for repeating myself, but we got COVID money from the province and indirectly from the feds. Can I ask through you, Mayor Saunderson, that the treasurer speak to that a little bit?
Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor McLeod. That is correct. Throughout 2020 and 2021, we did receive funding to offset the losses in terms of revenue and increased expenses for COVID. The number is outside of my realm right now. I believe it was close to 1.6 million, but I'd have to look it up.
Thank you. And so while you're looking that up, I will ask the second part or make the comment. If it's around $1.6 million, then the $36 million operating budget that we have isn't all coming from taxpayers. Then that 1.6 is incorporated in the 36 million that we're talking about as our bottom line this year.
Treasurer Quinlan.
If I may, Your Worship. Are you referring to in 2021 or 2022?
Sorry, well, I don't know. Did the $1.6 million come through?
Yeah, so we've only received COVID response money in 2020 and 2021. There is nothing in 2022 to offset the tax levy as it stands today.
Thank you. And so then through Mayor Saunderson to Treasurer Quinlan, what did that do to our 2021 budget? And did it allow us to carry over something to 2022 that what did that do to our budget from an actuals point of view from last year?
Treasurer Quinlan.
May, Your Worship, through you to Councillor McLeod. So I think the largest portion, of course, was received throughout 2020. In October, or I believe November, my apologies, I did bring forward a third quarter forecast for projection. So the expectation is that the surplus would be in and around $200,000 at the end of the year. Essentially, all of the COVID funding was used. 2020's, of course, there was no carryover. We used the full amount in 2020, and we have used the full amount in 2021, largely to offset the reductions in revenues, more specifically parks and recreation area, where, of course, facilities had to be closed for extended periods of time.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification on that. I appreciate it. I have another question, actually a couple of questions regarding a couple of items on the capital budget. First of all, item number 9735, which is to do with the repairs to the pool. And I am aware that, and I'm pretty sure it was Councillor Madigan and I who moved a resolution asking for a report on the viability and the future and the problems, the litany of problems at that facility. And we haven't seen it yet, but will this be included? Is this part of the ongoing shoddy workmanship that came from this particular, from the events that led to the judicial inquiry? Through to I guess, well, I'm not sure to whom I should direct that, either
I'm going to put that through to Director Culver.
Thank you.
Dean, if you can explain the $450,000 line item in the capital budget, please.
Thank you, Worship. The $450,000 line item is for tiling the pool subject to the receipt of a grant or funding to offset that cost. In lieu of that, we'll be returning to our normal operational program of painting the pool. It gets painted, I believe it's every 2 years. It's not this is not a deficiency issue. This is a choice issue that was made at the point when the building was built. The option there was to go with a painted interior. Tiling would mean that we could reduce or eliminate ongoing maintenance costs, but obviously at a higher upfront capital expense. So hopefully answer the question. It's an option either or. We won't be painting and tiling. We'll be doing either or, and only tiling if we're able to acquire funding to support it.
Funding.
All right, Councillor.
Nope, that answers my question on that one. Thank you. I will be making a motion to remove item 9376 from the capital budget. It is also grant dependent. However, I haven't seen a staff report on this item, and I am not interested in supporting it even in principle until such time as I do. And that is the Maple Bike priority. I feel like we need to see a staff report on that. I know that staff has responses from the public, but I'm not interested in doing that. Going forward is something that I don't know anything about yet. Thank you. Those are my comments, and that will be my amendment.
Thank you. I see your card, Councillor Doherty, and I'm going to make sure I've covered people who have not yet had an opportunity to speak, and then I will come back to you. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on the budget item? Seeing none, then I will go to Councillor Doherty. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty. CO Skinner, did you want to comment on? Go ahead, CO Skinner.
Actually, I think I put my card up too early. I would withdraw that, and thank you for recognizing me.
Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you. And I don't know whether it was my Wi-Fi or Councillor McLeod's, but I didn't hear her proposed cut in full. So I just wanted to ask her to restate it, please.
Certainly. Go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
Item 9376 from the capital budget.
What page is that?
Second to last of the budget package.
It's dealing with the Maple Street pilot project and the grant application. And Councillor McLeod's point is that we were expecting a staff report back on the success of the pilot project so that she would not be supporting it until we've received that report. Well, grant contingent expense.
Thank you.
All right, Council. If there's no other questions or comments, then I'm going to circle back to Councillor Jeffrey to put her amendment on the table. Councillor Reddy, does this deal with Councillor Jeffrey's amendment? No? All right.
I'm so sorry. Can we have a quick break, please?
Okay, it's now 2:32. So why don't we take a break and come back at 2:45. We'll resume at 2:45. So we'll take a 13-minute recess.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Okay. See everyone back shortly.
Sorry, Brian, it's not always me that suffers from TB, but it was today, that's for sure.
Oh, no worries. No worries. All right, Council, it's 2:45, so I'm going to call the meeting back in session. And just before, I had a follow-up question on a question from Councillor McLeod that I'd like to ask Treasurer Quinlan before I go back to Councillor Jeffrey for her amendment. And the question is this, Treasurer: we have I think a total budget envelope this year from operating and capital of about 116 million. About 64 million of that's operating, and the balance of that is capital. And right now, at the current levy rate that we're at, potential increase of 2.01%, that's going to generate around $36,785,000. I'm just wondering if you can take us through the breakdown for the balance of where those funds are going to come from, because it's essentially just a little bit over half of our operating dollars that are coming from the tax levy. And I'm just wondering if you can outline for us and for the public how that budget breaks out.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can do that. I think there's many different sources of funding that make up the operating budget. Of course, a large part of that would be user fees. And when I speak about user fees, I mean, for example, what you pay for water and wastewater usage. Also, when you're, renting the ice or doing public skating, or paying for different types of parks and facility usage. There's also, of course, a large part that we've included from grants. Some are grant dependent, or some are currently being funded through grants. There would also be, I guess, one of the final ones that, and it just went over my head again, I forgot, but it's reserves and reserve funds. So where we have sort of one-time type expenses, oftentimes we will use the reserve and reserve funds that are available to us. And I think that about sums it up. I guess from a capital standpoint, the only thing that would be different is there's a large amount of development charges that would go towards the funding of those capital projects as well.
And those would come from the growth dependent ones that are DC eligible, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, I will then go back to Councillor Jeffrey to put your amendment on the floor, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I'd like to move that we remove the communications person listed in the budget at $80,000 for 2022.
Do we have a seconder for that? Okay, so it's got Councillor Berman. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a comment. I believe one of the most important things that council does is communicate. And I don't think that, let me put it this way, I think that we can use more help communicating what council's doing to our public. And my own view is there is so much going on in our town, what staff is bringing out for our community, what council's adding to the piece that, you know, I would not recommend or support any removal of a communications person from this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Mayor. And just to be clear, it's not that I do not support the addition of this person ever, because I agree with Councillor Hamlin. It does play a very important role. But I also agree with Councillor Jeffrey that it may not, at least from my point of view, have been scoped out well enough for the 2022 budget. And we may find ourselves in a position, you know, halfway through this year where there may be funding that would come available for this kind of a person, at which point they could be added without impacting our budget going in. So for this reason, I would support the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And that raises a question for me, and I'm going to look to staff, whoever would like to answer that. I think communications is a critical portfolio. I think we're struggling to do it effectively, and we're going through a transformation. And I'm wondering if staff could comment on what this position would look like and how it would fit into to our current communications strategy. Executive Director Peg, if you could answer that, that'd be appreciated, please.
Thank you, Worship. If I may, I'd be pleased to give an overview of the position and why it's been brought forward for the 2022 budget. And hopefully in doing so, we'll address the questions that have been posed and some of the comments made. So the proposed role does have a supporting link to our community-based strategic plan, and in particular, the transparent and accountable local government and enhancing public trust. Within the community-based strategic plan, there are some specific action items that relate to communications, but this role would also help ensure accurate and timely information is shared with the community, including the sharing of council success stories. The communications position has existed as a single person department for 9 years. Over the years, the role and expectations have significantly grown, and that's as global and local expectations for real-time information sharing has been growing at an exponential rate. With this, we've recognized there is an imminent need to focus on the development and implementation of communication strategies and really pick up our game, I'll say, in this area. The current manager role is required to focus on a lot of day-to-day communications activities for the town, and therefore has little to no capacity to focus on strategizing communications plans, enhanced public engagement opportunities without incurring significant overtime. Additional support would ensure that the manager can focus on the development and implementation of a much needed communication strategy and framework, as well as support the many critical and strategic projects that are currently underway and are in front of council for consideration for 2022. When we look at comparable municipalities within our area, Collingwood communication staffing is comparably low, especially given the amount of strategic and high profile projects that we have underway. To name a few, Blue Mountain has 5 full-time employees in communications, Innisfil has 4 full-time employees, and the city of Barrie has 9 plus 2 contract employees. Mainly, the proposed role would support the growing community with this desire, as I mentioned, at both a local and global level for more public engagement and increasingly open and transparent communications. Of course, respecting that the mayor is the spokesperson for this municipality, communications does play a role in helping to ensure that messaging is prepared and in line with council's vision. And communications also recognizes that there's an opportunity to do better. And in order to do that, they're requesting additional resources to help better support council with those key messages. In addition, the communications manager, the one-person team, can currently develops communications plans, media strategies, manages the website, manages Engage Collingwood, which we're so thrilled there's been increased participation on that platform, coordinates public relations, manages media inquiries, issues management, social media, et cetera, et cetera. So without the additional staffing resource moving forward, as communications and engagement requests continue to rise and multiple channels such as social media continue to gain interest at, again, an exponential rate, we are at a risk, unfortunately, of stagnating the service level in this area. In order to meet the expectations of our community, including open and transparent communication and a growing list of key priorities, the second staff member would greatly assist with day-to-day communication activities so that the manager could shift their focus into more strategic items that have been identified as an area for improvement. The manager is doing their utmost to manage a significant workload, but I will say that unprecedented and unsustainable hours of overtime are being incurred in order to meet this current service level. So I do wish to share that with council as a consideration when they look at this position request. So thank you, Your Worship. I hope that answers your question and provides a little bit more context to why this position is so important.
Thank you for that, Executive Director. And I certainly understand Councillor Jeffrey's concern about our growing labor force and being responsible and making sure we have an efficient town hall. I do see that communications is an area that we need improvement in, and having one person for a community the size of Collingwood, I think is a disservice. We do a lot of good things around this table, and to me, it seems that a lot of our publicity is circumscribed or defined by what the press seems to pick up. And I don't think that's an efficient way to run town hall. I think we need to be more proactive, and we need to be getting our messaging out, because we have accomplished a lot of great things over the last 3 years. And so what I would like to see from staff is that if this position does go forward, that council hears in the first quarter or very early on in the new year what our communication strategy looks like, and how we are going to get our message out there in a way that's efficient, proactive, and serves both the council and the public. So, okay, I will start with Councillor McLeod, and then I'll give Councillor Jeffrey last word. Go ahead, Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Executive Director Peg. She mentioned Innisfil and Barrie. I'm just curious to know how many communications people there are in, for example, Clearview and ESSA and Wasaga Beach. Do they have multiple people?
Executive Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor McLeod. I will actually send a quick message to our communications manager who may have that data on hand. But for example, Wasaga Beach has one. And I do recall that some of the individuals we requested information from, the municipalities did not reply.
Councillor.
No, that's it. I just wanted to be sure that when we talk about comparators, that we talk about a lot of comparators. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So while I'm not interested in debating with staff on this, I think what I basically read in the original description that was included in the budget was more of a focus on branding Collingwood, which I think comes under the economic development portfolio. And I'm just curious as to when we came so siloistic in our approach to covering off portfolios, even though communications maybe only had one identified person. I know over many years in my 14 years of tenure that it was a shared portfolio. And as I commented at the last meeting, my expectation, and I think the comments were, that an intergovernmental person would be critical in our ability, particularly in communications with other orders of government, as to this town's priorities and its advocacy for them. So I just haven't seen a plan, and I'm really not prepared to vote on money for something that I don't think fits what it is we need. And it's not just the mayor that's the spokesperson for the town of Collingwood, but there's 9 elected officials to council who are ambassadors of our message and are quite capable of carrying that out in the community until we do have a satisfactory plan. It's been our intention for a few years now to get on to the very things we're talking about again today, but I haven't seen the plan that suggests it's going to happen. So I'm going to stand by my amendment and just see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. All right. Councillor Doherty, go to you, and then we're going to call the vote on this.
Thank you. Having just heard from Executive Director Peg and from yourself, Mayor Saunderson, while I did originally second this motion, in retrospect, I think I will continue to support that line item. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, with that being said, then I'm going to call the vote. All in favor of the amendment? And opposed? And so that is defeated in a draw.
Sorry.
I'm going to look to Clerk Thomas. I see Councillor Madigan's, but I don't know. I don't know if he's able to vote. So I'm assuming that it's a 3-3 draw, and that would defeat the motion, the amendment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, if Councillor Madigan is not participating in the vote, he's considered abstaining, which is considered, actually, if
But
he's
that would
not
be a
turning on his
negative vote.
camera, I'm going to say if he's not voting, it's abstaining, but we can't even confirm that he's listening to this conversation and whether he's actually absent at this point in time.
Okay, well, I think it best then maybe for the minutes, subject to your comments, that it be a 3-3 draw. I think I wouldn't want to interpret a vote when the council member is not able to participate. That brings us then to Councillor Doherty, your amendment. Go ahead, please.
Did you want me to restate, Your Worship?
Yes, please, and then we'll get a seconder, and then we can have discussion.
Thank you. To remove the $50,000 that is included in the budget right now for the UN Sustainable Communities Conference in 2022.
Do we have a seconder for that? Last call for a seconder. Councillor Doherty, I don't see a seconder, so that doesn't get on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
And that brings us then to the motion, Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you. And that is to remove item 9376 from the capital budget.
All right, and do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Berman. All right, the motion's on the table. I know you addressed it earlier, Councillor MacLeod. I think you were clear. Do you want to make any further statements on that?
No, I think I was clear.
Okay. Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a comment. Well, and maybe I have, okay, sorry. Comment and a question. I'm ready. I believe the Maple Street Bike Project finished about 8 or 9 weeks ago. And I appreciate that a report's been requested as to the outcome of that and what a future bike project might look like. But I'm also aware that we've had a very busy couple of months at council that will go right till Christmas. And I certainly don't find any fault in the fact that we don't have a report already. You know, I think our staff spent a lot of time just on the budget. And also, I think it strikes me there's always lots of things in the budget that we don't have reports on and we don't know about. And that's part of what unfolds and will unfold in 2022. There's no way we can go through the whole budget for the town and understand everything and have a report on everything. So I'm content to leave this in here, but I did have a question for staff through you, Mr. Mayor. Will there be a report from staff on a future possibly permanent or any kind of bike priority on Maple Street before it would be constructed? Thank you.
Thank you. Director Culver is able to participate there. Okay, go ahead, Dean, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, the Bike Priority Street project is kind of being handled by Public Works and Engineering. So I see that Director Slama has turned on her camera, and I'll defer to her comments.
Thank you. My apologies. Director Slama, go ahead, Peggy, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Hanlon, could you repeat your question? I heard most of what you said. I just missed your question, your actual question.
Yes, of course, through you, Mr. Mayor. There's a Maple Street Bike Priority Lane project in the budget that's dependent on us getting grant money before it goes ahead. But I'm wondering if there would be a report to council about what this would be like and a chance for council to comment on it before it was built, assuming the grant money came through.
Director Slama.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Hanlon, I appreciate you repeating that question. Yes, the intention is for staff to be bringing forward a report as mentioned by yourself and Councillor McLeod as well, which summarized the pilot project that we ran in the summer and would be bringing forth a recommendation of staff's recommendation of what to do as a result of that pilot project. So we were hoping that we'd get it in before the end of the year, but it was delayed a bit. So we are targeting the January development and operations. But yes, report will be presented to committee and council that would outline what the proposed budget would be used for.
Thank you. That's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, council? Councillor Doherty.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of, I think, one of the most significant projects which this municipality undertook this past year against the general objective of traffic calming. As with many initiatives like this, it matters not to me whether the pilot study comes out mostly positive or mostly negative, because the first of these kinds of tests sometimes don't come out positive. But it is a significant statement to our residents and to visitors to our community that we are serious about traffic calming, that we are serious about active transportation. And I think it's extremely important that we move forward with this initiative, and hopefully we will see it on more streets as our town grows and evolves. So I will be continuing to support this budget item.
Thank you, Councillor. I do have a question. We seem to be it's two sides of the same coin. We're going to get our staff report. And my question to you, Director Slama, is really chicken and the egg. Presumably, we're going to have the staff report, and then based on direction from council, the staff would move forward with the grant application. The grant application wouldn't happen independent of that report, would it?
No, you're correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so based on that answer, then, if we get the report hopefully in Q1, January of next year, and council decides to move forward with that, then the grant application could go forward. So based on that answer, I think there's clarity there, and I thank staff for that clarification. So with that being said, I will call the report, the vote then on Councillor McLeod's motion to amend by removing this capital line item until we receive the staff report. All in favor? And Councillor Madigan's there, okay. And opposed? So noted, and that amendment is carried. Those are the amendments that I'm aware of, Council. So with that being said, I'm going to take us back then to the main motion. I'm going to read it. It's short, just so everyone's clear. And the motion reads that Council receives staff report T 2021-23 for information, and that Council provides staff direction to move forward to the public meeting on December 13th, 2021. And I'm going to look to Clerk Almas. Based on the amendments that we just dealt with, that would, should I be adding the word as amended or with the amendments as passed at this meeting?
Thank you, your worship. I would include the words as amended.
Okay, so I will add those words on and as amended. And I have a mover and a seconder, I'm quite sure. So unless there's any questions or comments on the main motion, and we've had good discussion, I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried. And that takes us into old or deferred business, which is item 6. Oh, sorry, I am going to go back. Clerk Almas, we have 5.2 public delegations on the budget discussions. Is there anyone in our audience that would like to make a delegation this afternoon on our budget discussions? Okay, thank you. Seeing that 5.3, I think we've dealt with the discussions that we've had and the amendments that were put on the floor. So that will bring us then to item 6.1, which is C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces with feedback. And I will pass it over to Clerk Almas. Sarah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, your worship. I will introduce again, Manager of Accountability, Procurement and Risk Management, Manager Truman, to provide an update. And again, following the update, council will need to make a recommendation on moving forward. A reminder that council did receive legal advice in camera at the previous SIC meeting related to the financial disclosure piece.
Manager Truman, go ahead, please.
Thank you, your worship, and good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to start by offering a quick reminder of what has happened to lead us to this point. The initial draft of the Code of Conduct was brought to the special SIC meeting on October 14th to accept the report and to allow staff to begin engaging with the public. At the time, the committee requested clarification on several points, and also amendments were requested to be included in the final draft. Public engagement was held from October 27th to November 7th. And as highlighted in the staff report provided, no changes occurred as a result of the public engagement. The draft posted for public review contained all the amendments and points of clarification that were requested at committee. I also wanted to highlight at this time some of the changes and where they are in the document. So just very quickly, on page 15 of 53 in the staff report, that was the new language included in the introduction section. On page 21 of 53, that was the placeholder for the Collingwood Judicial Recommendation number 19, which Clerk Almas just mentioned as well at the beginning. On page 22 of 53, there was updated language added to the commentary in that section. On page 27 of 53, under Rule 3.1, Section A, had updated language as well. That was passed after an amendment. On page 28 of 53, under Rule 3.2E, E is actually a brand new item that was added on the recommendation of our Integrity Commissioner along with staff. And then on page 29 of 53, 2953, new commentary was added in that paragraph as well. So that's a brief summary of the changes that were made to this particular report.
Thank you, Manager Truman. I'm going to look at Clerk Almas to see if there's anyone in our audience who would like to speak to this item. Seeing none, then I'm going to read in the recommendation. And it reads that staff report C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces be received, and the council approve the Town of Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council and local boards, and the Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces as attached hereto. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Berman and Councillor Doherty. Thank you. And I will open up the floor then for discussion, comments, or questions from council. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. Upon a rereading of the staff report, and thank you so much to Manager Truman for all the hard work that you have done on this, and to staff in general for paying such close attention to what has come out of the judicial inquiry. I just want to ask, I have one question and I have one amendment. My one question is, what are the ramifications of it's under the investigations section. If you want to start heading in that direction, which I believe is, it's point 13 of the investigations, and it's on page 47 of the proposed text of the new code of conduct, or a proposed amended code of conduct. And I'm concerned a little bit about the timing of reports from the Integrity Commissioner back to council and back to complainants when it comes to situations regarding alleged breaches of the code of conduct. And it's in the current code of conduct under, I believe it's section 18, the Integrity Commissioner is required to reach out to a person about whom a complaint has been made within 14 days, and then report back. And then that person has 14 days in addition to that to report back to the Integrity Commissioner with a response to the complaint. Then the Integrity Commissioner is supposed to respond to the complainant within an additional 14 days. And so that looks to me like about 21 days. But now we're looking at 90 days, generally 90 days. It's really softening the language and the requirements of the Integrity Commissioner's role in investigating complaints. Now, I also understand that in our current code of conduct, 90 days is basically the expressed drop dead date for reports to be brought back after a complaint has been lodged. But I'm curious to know, A, why are we softening that language from 14 plus 14 plus 14 to generally 90? And well, that's question one. Why are we softening that language to generally 90? Through you, Mayor Saunderson, to Manager Truman.
Go ahead, Manager Truman.
Your worship, and through you to Councillor McLeod to attempt to answer that question. To be honest, this parts of this were a templated document that have been used by the Integrity Commissioner to develop different code of conducts in different municipalities. So that language may have just been embedded there at that particular time. And as we went through and reviewed and made changes, it did not kind of jump out as something that needed to be adjusted. So there is no hard and fast reason why it's now at 90 days, but that's how we got to that particular number of days.
Follow up, Councillor.
I believe Clerk Almas had her hand up as a response.
Sorry, go ahead, Sarah, please.
Thank you.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. In addition to Manager Truman's response, I believe being a little less prescriptive as that was previously provided in section 18.6 in the current code allowed our Integrity Commissioners a little bit more flexibility based on the complexity of what the complaint is. Pursuant to those timelines had been a previous conversation that we had. So I think that in addition is one of the reasons why, again, their suggestion on particularly the investigation as the Integrity Commissioner is responsible for that has increased that flexibility there.
Okay, thank you. And again, through you, Mayor Saunderson, a question on this particular point, again, back to point 13. What penalties are there for our Integrity Commissioner if they are non-compliant with the generally 90 days that is outlined in the new code of conduct, or the absolutely 90 days, which is included in our current code of conduct?
Manager? Clerk Almas, go ahead.
Certainly, I'll start with this one, although Manager Truman would definitely be able to respond as it's part of procurement and the contract management piece of it. One of the key points that should be identified is staff are not aware when an investigation, not normally or necessarily aware. In some occasions, staff are copied on a request for an investigation or a complaint that's been filed with the Integrity Commissioner. So unless the complainant has advised staff, we really aren't aware of that process. But if we become aware that there is an issue with timing and not being compliant, that is something definitely that I'll have Manager Truman address.
Manager Truman.
Yeah, just to thank you, Your Worship, and just to follow up on what Clerk Almas mentioned, yeah, that turns into contract management under the procurement, under all of the different procurement directives and guidelines. And this particular contract does fall under Clerk Services and with me, so I would be the person to follow up with the Integrity Commissioner to to investigate as to why there was a late response and to talk through the different kind of ramifications around that. In generally speaking, you don't want anything to ever get into any idea of a breach of contract and then the penalties that come with that. But if it becomes a common issue, then obviously that has to be addressed in a more official capacity.
Follow up, Councillor.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And so I would like to. I will leave that part of the code of conduct as it is in the new one. Thank you. I will not be making an amendment on that one. However, I will be bringing the following amendment, and that is that the code of conduct be amended to include the suggested wording from legal counsel, which will help us fulfill recommendation number 19 from the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry. And I can read that in if you'd like.
You know what? I'm going to come back to you, Councillor. So I'll go around the table and then I will come back for amendments.
Okay, great.
Other questions or comments, Council, on the staff report? All right. I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to come back to you, Councillor McLeod, right now.
Excellent. And the wording is, so this would go into section 12 of rule number 1. And it would be a member who has been elected to council shall within 90 days of assuming office and on an annual basis thereafter disclose in writing to the clerk the source of any private employment, business, or professional income in any directorships held. A record of these disclosures by council members shall be made available to members of the public upon request. I'll need a seconder, of course.
Will, and I will look for a seconder. I've got Councillor Jeffrey.
Shall I speak to it?
You can speak to it. You can go first if you'd like. Go ahead.
I want to be able to report that we have done absolutely everything we can to live up to the 306 recommendations contained in the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry, and that we can put that unfortunate time behind us and know beyond reasonable doubt, I suppose, that we have done everything possible to prevent the kinds of things that took place which led us to that unfortunate time. And so if this is something that can do that, and we are told that it is legal to do, then I'm happy to do it. And just as I have been happy to support most of the, well, I'm going to say almost all of the other 305 recommendations that came from the Judicial Inquiry. And that's where I stand on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, questions or comments on the amendment? Councillor Hamlin.
Excuse my dog barking. I oppose this amendment. There were a number of amendments suggested, of course, to various pieces of legislation and laws and of our code of conduct by the Judicial Inquiry. Some were to provincial legislation. This particular recommendation was not something that the Judicial Inquiry suggested. That it be a change at the provincial level. And from our own staff report that references our input from our solicitors, this is not something that we can require by virtue of provincial legislation, and that we have no, legal authority to enforce this. I believe that the judicial inquiry made a mistake. Dare I say it, that this should have been under the list for the province to fix. Of the 444 municipalities in our province, we would be the only one requiring our elected officials to make disclosures of their private financial interests. Now, if one is retired, they don't care. What are you gonna, if you work for yourself, it's pretty straightforward. There's lots, if you're a civil servant, it's pretty straightforward. This more simple elected officials' lives are, the less concern anyone's going to have about disclosing private financial interests. But as I look forward into our future, I say that I don't know, and I wonder if my fellow councillors know what kind of unintended impact making this disclosure requirement would have. We don't really, other than our staff report, we really don't know what kind of impact this would have on people who would step forward to run for office. We don't have any investigation by the province into this. I feel like our town has gone way beyond what any other municipality has done already. And I am very proud of what we have done to close all the potential gaps that could be there. Even the fact we have a lobbyist registrar for a community of our size is very extraordinary. We have a staff person, totally hired to look after these kind of things. We have, anyway, I won't go over our year-end review where, all of the things we've done, and I'm very proud of all this. But I do feel that this goes beyond what we have the ability and should be taking forward as we look to fill our council positions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I do have a comment. And it's unanimous around this table, the importance of the judicial inquiry, I think. And the 306 recommendations that Justice Morocco and Lead Counsel McGran came up with input from high-end civil servants and lawyers for the parties involved, were very thorough and has been a roadmap for this community and a priority for this council. And we have adopted the majority of them. By far and away, the majority of them. We're looking at only not adopting 2 of the 306. So that's a considerable way that we have gone as a community. And I know that I speak on behalf of all of council when I say we are extremely proud of the work we have done, and there's more to be done, and we are committed to doing that. But at the end of the day, for me, we have to make sure that the recommendations that we implement, changes that we make, are going to cure the ill that caused what happened in 2012. And we heard from our legal counsel that this type of financial disclosure would not have done that. For example, we know that former council member Ian Chadwick was paid $700 a month by Compenso to give communications advice. And he was on that payroll and owed money when he voted on the sale of 50% of the utility and the purchase of the Sprung buildings. And unfortunately, we also know that the wording of this amendment would not have caught that. So if what we're passing won't catch the conduct that we're trying to prevent, while at the same time posing a potential barrier for other candidates to run in the future for our Collingwood Council, then to me, unfortunately, it's not accomplishing what we need. and it could have unintended consequences in deterring those from running for council. I am all about pushing for all of these amendments and recommendations where I know they will make a change in our community. And unfortunately, I don't think this amendment can accomplish what we're trying to prevent without significant changes. And for that reason, I won't be supporting. That being said, I will call the vote then. All in favor of the amendment? And opposed? And that is defeated then in a draw. So that takes us back then to our main motion, unless there are any other amendments, council. Seeing none, then we'll go back to the main motion. And I'll reread it, just so everyone's clear. The staff report C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces be received, and the council approve the Town of Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council and local boards, and the Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and local task forces as attached here too. We've had good discussion, and this has been a long process, and I want to thank staff for the hard work, and particularly Clerk Thomas and Manager Truman. This is a big step forward in implementing significant recommendations of the judicial inquiry. So I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. That brings us then to public delegations. I'll look to Clerk Thomas to see if we have anyone in our audience that would like to comment on today's meeting. Nope. And that brings us to our adjournment. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'd just like to do a clarification for my understanding in moving forward. If we are at a meeting and we have our screen off, are we at the meeting or are we not? And are we included in the vote or are we not? Because I think those 3-3 votes would be 3-4 votes with the abstention. So I'm just trying to get it clear in my mind for going forward, what it means to have a councillor on a call where we can't, they're not participating in the vote. And I'd just like clarification through you to the clerk, please.
Okay, I'm going to look to Clerk Thomas, and I will say that I called those a draw. I did not impute a negative vote to that, given Councillor Madigan's difficulties getting in and out of the meeting. So for the purposes of the vote count today, I didn't include him unless he was an obvious yes or no in the vote. But I will look to Clerk Thomas for clarification moving forward. Sarah?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is one of these electronic participation odd instances. We're trying to ensure that members can be as engaged as possible. And I would agree. I think before, as we're bringing our procedural bylaw amendments back, I think we need to be clear in those updates around that framework. But if the votes that occurred during the beginning of the meeting, originally we contemplated that they would be acknowledged as being the member of council would be acknowledged as abstaining. And if you abstain from a vote, you're technically counted as negative, as Councillor Madigan did move in and out of the meeting. And when we got to close votes and there was no response from the councillor, we're going to acknowledge that the councillor was not available in attendance at that time. And would concur that it would be considered a tie, and again, a tie, sorry, and therefore defeated. So at this point, again, these recommendations from today's meeting are going forward to the council meeting at this time on, I believe, the 13th, potentially the 20th. And again, council can take a look at potentially reconsidering any sort of decisions that were made, recommended from the standing committee.
Thank you. Now I'll yes to adjournment.
That's what I was waiting for. Thank you, Councillor. All in favor? All right, and that is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a busy meeting.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day and be careful shoveling snow.